affirmative rebuttal, we're going to be covering the last two negative speeches. I'm going to do that by looking at 5 main issues that should incorporate most of the points in today's round. The first one is it just? Is the exploitation of e-waste to developing countries just? And this is where the whole round hinges on. They've accepted the criterion of justice. If we demonstrate to you here today that this exploitation is unjust and is happening because of U.S. policy, then the affirmative should win today's round, period. Let's go and look at whether or not it's just. Under harm 1, our card specifically stated, it is fundamentally unjust for the United States to export e-waste. The next one that we need to look at is whether or not these people actually know what they're accepting, and the answer is they absolutely don't. According to the UC Davis Journal of International Law and Policy in 2008, quote, the possibility of better earnings lures uninformed workers to endure long shifts on e-waste, ignorant of the fact that the electronics they touch are very lethal, end quote. Completely ignorant of the fact that it's dangerous. Sound like justice to you? I don't think so. My partner, in fact, read you a piece of evidence in her last speech that called it what it is. Exploitation. Unjust exploitation. Not positive trade, unjust exploitation. It's never really been refuted. They're just like, well, they want it, so it's okay. No, it's not okay. They're not informed of what it is. The governments are trying to say no. We're overwhelming them with the pure size of our exports, and it's exploitation. At the end of the day, it's unjust, and affirmative ballot is justified right there. Let's go and move to the second issue today. Is e-waste helpful? Is e-waste helpful? Now, in their last speech, the negative tried to say under the disadvantage that, well, developing nations depend on this waste. They first off said that they need raw materials, and that these countries are willing to accept it for raw materials. 2 points. First off, the countries aren't willing to accept it. We read you a piece of evidence on that dated 2010. If you refer back to the negatives evidence, it was from 2004. Secondarily, underneath this, we need to understand that it does cripple the entire country. Evidence that we read that has never been refuted by the negative team. Let's go ahead and move on. The next thing that they brought up underneath this is that they need it for scrap metal. Well, here's the interesting thing. We're not banning the export of scrap metal. We're banning the export of used electronics, not scrap metal. Scrap metal is not effective. All the cards that they read underneath that mentioned scrap metal completely disregarded right there. And their final point underneath this was that there's no timeline and that that's going to cause a problem because we're ending the trade tomorrow. That's actually not much of a problem at all. You see, again, we have to examine not only the issue of whether or not it's morally just for the United States to export this, but also look at the net benefits. And the net benefits clearly say this is a destructive trade that needs to stop now, and they really provided you no reason to the contrary. Let's go ahead and move down to our next point. Is it harmful? Is it harmful? And the answer here is absolutely yes. Our first harm, again, never really refuted the evidence underneath that, and we've read you multiple pieces of evidence to substantiate the fact that this is in fact an unjust exploitation of developing countries, not a positive trade based on competitive advantage. So first off, it harms justice. Second of all, nothing to refute our health harm. Harm 2 was that it harms people in developing countries, but then our subpoint B, never refuted, was that you're harming the health of the American people. So the harms are first off to developing countries' health, and then also to the health of the American people. That's never been refuted. Our third harm, again, the evidence was never refuted. That is that developing nations are completely crippled by this e-waste trade and kept in their developing state. The next harm was that we lose opportunities in the U.S., and again, they never really refuted our evidence underneath this. So what do we see? We see 4 significant harms, none of which have been properly refuted by the negative team. Right there, again, the e-waste trade is harmful, and that necessitates action. The fourth issue we need to look at today is can we help? And that's where we need to examine this issue of solvency. And the issue with solvency here is that really all of their arguments relied on faulty premises. The first one about how we're not enforcing the rules simply doesn't apply because we're shifting enforcement to customs. That's our entire mandate too. And the Government Accountability Office, which they quoted to say the current rules aren't enforced, actually said if we shifted it to customs, it would all work out. The next solvency point about the charity loophole is not, the evidence does not say that's U.S. law. That was an issue with the Basel Convention and one specific ban they were talking about there, not U.S. law, and we don't have a charity loophole. It's used electronics, period. The next was the definition. Again, this is used electronics. If it's used and it has electricity, it's now banned exports. Right there is the definition. I don't really see what the issue was here. The fourth solvency point was that countries want it. Well, no, they don't. We proved that with evidence. That's really irrelevant. The fifth solvency point was that we can't handle it. They never provided evidence that can't go to landfills. We said landfills are perfectly safe. The stuff can go there and be absolutely fine. And then the final point we need to look at is whether or not e-waste is banned. It simply is not. The RCRA regulation is responsible for federal definition of hazardous waste. And we don't define e-waste as hazardous waste, so it's not banned under the OECD treaty. And in fact, they've never provided any evidence to the contrary that the U.S. has banned the export of e-waste under the OECD treaty. Never there. They've never read a card to say that. So at the end of the day, it's unjust, it's not helpful, it's harmful, we can help, and it's going on right now. As a result, we urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.